Your baby cries less with the babysitter, less with grandma, less with your partner, and more, so much more, with you. And if you've ever stood in your kitchen at the end of a long day, baby wailing in your arms while everyone around you says, "She was perfect for me all afternoon," you've probably asked yourself the question that no one seems to have a real answer to. What am I doing wrong? Nothing. You are doing nothing wrong. In fact, the science says you might be doing everything right. What you're experiencing has a name. It has a mechanism. It is written into the architecture of your baby's developing brain. And by the time this video is over, you will never look at your baby's tears the same way again. To understand why your baby cries more with you, we have to go back to a hospital in post-war London. The year is 1951. A British psychiatrist named John Bowlby has just been commissioned by the World Health Organization to study something that nobody in mainstream medicine had taken seriously yet. What happens to children who are separated from their mothers in early life? What he found shook the medical establishment. Children raised in hospitals and orphanages, children who were fed, clothed, kept warm, and given every physical necessity, were failing to thrive. They were withdrawn, developmentally delayed. Some stopped eating, some stopped moving, some died. And the only variable that seemed to explain it wasn't nutrition or hygiene or medical care. It was the absence of a consistent, responsive human relationship. Bowlby called what he was observing the consequence of broken attachment. And from that observation, he spent the next 3 decades building what became the most influential framework in developmental psychology, attachment theory. The core idea sounds almost embarrassingly simple when you first hear it. Babies are born biologically primed to seek proximity to one specific person or a small number of people who will protect them from danger. This isn't learned behavior. It isn't cultural. It is a survival system as ancient and hardwired as hunger or pain. Bowlby called this person the attachment figure, and he argued that the entire emotional and cognitive development of a child hinges on whether that relationship is safe, consistent, and responsive. Now here's where it gets interesting for you, because Bowlby's theory didn't just explain what happens when attachment breaks down. It explained something far more surprising: what happens when it works perfectly. Drop a number in the comments right now. 1, if you've been told your baby behaves better with someone else. 2, if you've never had that experience. Because I want to know how many parents watching this have felt exactly what I'm about to describe. The answer Bowlby arrived at, and the one that modern neuroscience has since confirmed in ways he never could have imagined, is that your baby cries more with you, not in spite of your bond, but because of it. The word attachment gets used so loosely in parenting culture that it's worth slowing down and being precise about what it actually means in the scientific literature. Because it does not mean closeness. It does not mean love. And it absolutely does not mean that your baby is attached to you in the way we casually say a child is attached to a toy or a blanket. In Bowlby's framework, attachment is a behavioral system. It is a set of instinctive behaviors, crying, reaching, clinging, following, that are activated when a baby perceives threat or danger, and that are designed to achieve one specific outcome: proximity to the attachment figure. When the baby feels safe, the attachment system is quiet. The baby explores, plays, babbles, looks around with curiosity. But the moment something feels wrong, a loud noise, an unfamiliar face, hunger, pain, or simply the disappearance of the caregiver from view, the attachment system fires, and it fires hard. Now, in the 1970s, a developmental psychologist named Mary Ainsworth took Bowlby's theory and did something brilliant with it. She designed an experiment called the Strange Situation, a structured series of separations and reunions between a baby and caregiver, conducted in a lab with an unfamiliar adult present. What she was measuring wasn't how much babies cried during separation. It was how they behaved when the caregiver came back. What she found was that babies fell into distinct patterns. Some babies, the ones she called securely attached, cried during separation, sometimes intensely. But when the caregiver returned, they sought comfort, accepted it, settled, and went back to exploring. The distress was real, the recovery was real, and the resumption of play was real. Other babies showed different patterns. Some seemed almost indifferent to the caregiver's return. Some became so distressed they couldn't be soothed at all. These were the insecure attachment patterns, and they correlated reliably and powerfully with caregiving that had been inconsistent, dismissive, or frightening. But here's the piece that most parenting content completely misses. The securely attached babies cried more during separation than many insecurely attached ones. The babies who showed the least distress during separation weren't the most secure. They were often the most avoidant. They had learned, at a neurological level, to suppress their distress signals because expressing them hadn't reliably brought comfort. Let that land for a moment. A baby who doesn't cry for you isn't necessarily a calm baby. They may be a baby who has already learned that crying doesn't work. So why does your baby cry less with grandma? Why does the babysitter get the easy version of your child? This is the question that drives parents to the edge of their sanity, and the answer is one of the most counterintuitive things developmental science has ever produced. Your baby cries more with you because you are safe. Not safe in a passive sense, safe in the most active, neurologically precise sense of the word. You are the person your baby's brain has identified as the one who can actually fix what's wrong. And because of that, your presence doesn't calm the attachment system down. It activates it. It gives it permission to fire. Think about it from the baby's perspective. When your baby is with grandma or the babysitter, the attachment system is already in a low-grade state of alert. The primary caregiver is absent. The environment is unfamiliar or less familiar. The baby's nervous system is doing something that researchers sometimes call behavioral inhibition, a kind of holding pattern where the baby suppresses distress signals because the person who can actually respond to them isn't there. It's not that the baby isn't distressed with grandma. It's that expressing that distress feels pointless. The signal has nowhere to go. But the moment you walk through the door, the moment your baby sees your face, smells your scent, hears your voice, something unlocks. The attachment system recognizes its target, and every piece of distress the baby has been holding, the tiredness, the overstimulation, the hunger that wasn't quite hunger, the low-grade discomfort of being away from you, comes flooding out. You didn't cause the distress. You gave it somewhere to go. Bowlby called the attachment figure the safe haven, the person the baby returns to under threat. But what that phrase really means at a behavioral level is that your presence is the signal that it's finally okay to fall apart, because you will catch them. If that reframing just shifted something for you, leave a like right now, because I want to know how many parents watching this needed to hear exactly that. And here's what makes this even more profound. The babies who cry the most intensely when reunited with their primary caregiver are statistically the ones with the most secure attachments. The cry is not a protest against you. It is a declaration of trust in you. Let's go one level deeper, because the neuroscience here is extraordinary, and it makes the safe haven effect feel less like a theory and more like something you can almost see happening in real time. Your baby's brain at birth is not a miniature adult brain. It is a radically different organ. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for emotional regulation, rational thinking, and the ability to calm yourself down, is almost entirely offline. It won't reach anything close to functional maturity until the mid-20s. What is online from birth and running at full power is the limbic system, the brain's emotional core, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the structures that detect threat, generate distress, and scream for help. Your baby is, neurologically speaking, pure emotion with no brake pedal. Now here's where your role becomes something almost miraculous. Because what developmental neuroscientists have documented through decades of research into early brain development is that the primary caregiver's regulated nervous system is the baby's brake pedal. The baby cannot self-regulate, but they can co-regulate. They can borrow your calm. When you hold your distressed baby, your heartbeat, your breathing rhythm, your skin temperature, your voice, all of it communicates directly to your baby's nervous system. The vagus nerve, which runs from the brainstem through the heart and gut, is exquisitely sensitive to these signals. A calm, regulated caregiver activates the baby's parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state, and the cortisol spike that came with the distress begins to fall. But here's the critical implication. This co-regulation only works with the attachment figure. Or more precisely, it works most powerfully with the attachment figure because your baby's brain has spent weeks or months learning the specific sensory signature of your presence, your heartbeat, your smell, the exact cadence of your voice. These are the inputs the brain has mapped to safety. When grandma holds the baby, the co-regulation is real, but it's operating on a less familiar map. The nervous system settles, but more slowly, less completely. The baby is soothed, but not in the same way. Not in the way that only you can provide. And so the paradox completes itself. Your baby cries more with you because your baby's brain knows, at a level far below conscious thought, that you are the one person whose nervous system can actually meet theirs. The crying isn't a sign that you're failing at regulation. It's a sign that your baby trusts you to do it. At this point, most parents have a very reasonable fear, and I want to address it directly, because if I don't, the comments will, and they should. If your baby is crying more with you, and crying involves a stress response, and stress responses involve cortisol, then is all this crying actually harming your baby's developing brain? This is a serious question, and it deserves a serious answer. The short version, it depends entirely on what happens after the cry. The longer version requires us to distinguish between two very different kinds of stress. Developmental scientists use the terms tolerable stress and toxic stress, and the difference between them is not the intensity of the stressor. It's the presence or absence of a buffering relationship. When a baby cries and a responsive caregiver comes, when the distress is met, acknowledged, and soothed, the cortisol spike rises and then falls. The nervous system returns to baseline. And here's what's remarkable. This cycle of stress and recovery, repeated over thousands of interactions in the first years of life, actually builds the stress regulation architecture of the brain. The baby system learns through experience that distress is survivable, that help comes, that the world is responsive. This is what researchers in the field of developmental neuroscience sometimes call stress inoculation, the idea that manageable buffered stress, followed by reliable comfort, strengthens the very systems it temporarily activates. What is harmful, what the research on early adversity consistently shows, is prolonged, unresponded to distress. Stress without a buffer. Crying that goes unmet, not occasionally, but chronically and predictably. That is the pattern associated with long-term changes in stress reactivity, not the crying itself, the absence of response. So when your baby cries and you come, when you pick them up, hold them, speak to them, try to understand what they need, you are not reinforcing the crying. You are not creating a spoiled baby. You are literally building the neural architecture of emotional resilience, one responded to cry at a time. Be honest with yourself right now. How many times have you been told to let them cry it out by someone who had no idea what was actually happening in that baby's brain? Drop a comment below, because that advice has a very specific context where it may be appropriate, and a very large context where it is not. The science does not say you must respond to every cry instantly and perfectly. It says that the overall pattern of your responsiveness, what researchers call sensitive caregiving, is what shapes the attachment. And sensitive caregiving is not perfection. It is presence with repair. If what you've heard in the last few sections has shifted something, if you're starting to see your baby's tears differently, then this is exactly the kind of content we build here. Evidence-based, honest, built for parents who want to understand the science, not just survive the day. If that's you, subscribing takes 1 second. And what I'm about to get into next, the part about what happens when attachment goes wrong and what you can actually do about it. That's where this all becomes truly practical. Not every parent watching this has a securely attached baby. And if you suspect yours might not, if your baby seems unusually passive or unusually inconsolable, or if you've been through something difficult in the early months, this section is for you. And I want to be careful here because this is where parenting content can tip from informative into alarming. So let me be very direct. Insecure attachment is not a life sentence. It is not a diagnosis. It is a pattern, a learned behavioral strategy that a baby has developed in response to the caregiving environment they've experienced so far. And patterns can change. Mary Ainsworth Strange Situation identified 3 main patterns beyond secure attachment. Anxious, ambivalent babies, sometimes called resistant, are the ones who cry intensely during separation and then cannot be soothed during reunion. They push away the caregiver and reach for them at the same time. They have learned that the caregiver is inconsistently available, So they crank up the distress signal to maximum all the time because they never know when it will be answered. Avoidant babies are the opposite. They seem calm. They explore without checking back. They barely react when the caregiver leaves and barely react when they return. They have learned that expressing distress doesn't bring comfort, so they've suppressed the signal. They look easy. They are not easy. They are managing alone. And then there is a third pattern, disorganized attachment, associated with caregiving that has been frightening or traumatic. These babies show contradictory, confused behaviors during reunion. They want to approach and are simultaneously afraid. This pattern is associated with the highest risk of later developmental difficulty. Now, here is what I need you to hear. None of these patterns are caused by a single bad day, or a week of illness, or a period of postpartum depression that you fought through. They are shaped by the overall, repeated pattern of caregiving across hundreds and thousands of interactions. And this is the part that the research is unambiguous about. They are changeable. Studies tracking children whose caregiving environments improved show measurable shifts in attachment classification. The brain is plastic. The relationship is the intervention. If you're watching this and feeling a knot in your stomach, I want you to do one thing. Keep watching. Because the next section is about exactly what sensitive caregiving actually looks like in practice. Not as a performance standard, but as something you are probably already doing more of than you think. Here is one of the cruelest tricks that parenting culture plays on parents. It presents sensitive caregiving as a performance, as something you either have or you don't, as a standard that requires constant attunement, constant responsiveness, constant emotional availability. And then it watches parents, exhausted, human, imperfect parents, fail to meet that standard and conclude that they are the problem. The research says something completely different. The landmark work of developmental psychologist Ed Tronick, particularly his still face experiment, which you may have seen, showed something that initially looked devastating and turned out to be profoundly reassuring. When a mother suddenly goes expressionless and unresponsive during play with her infant, the baby escalates through a predictable sequence of distress, reaching, pointing, vocalizing, then eventually withdrawing. The baby's stress response activates rapidly and visibly. But what Tronick found, and what his subsequent research confirmed, is that it's not the rupture that matters most. It's the repair. When the mother re-engages, smiles, speaks, reaches back, the baby recovers. The stress falls, the play resumes, and this cycle of connection, rupture, and repair is not a failure of sensitive caregiving. It is sensitive caregiving. Tronick's research suggested that even highly attuned mother-infant pairs are only in genuine synchrony, truly reading each other accurately, about 30% of the time. 30%, which means the other 70% of the time, something is off, a misread cue, a distracted moment, a response that doesn't quite land, and the baby is fine, because the repair comes. This is what researchers mean when they talk about good enough caregiving, a phrase coined by the pediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. Not perfect, not constant, not superhuman. Good enough. Present enough. Responsive enough, often enough, that the baby's overall experience is one of a world that answers back. So what does this mean practically? It means that the moments when you're distracted, when you miss a cue, when you respond to the wrong need, when you're too tired to be fully present. Those moments are not damaging your baby. They are part of the normal texture of a real relationship. What matters is the overall pattern, that you come back, that you repair, that the baby's experience accumulated over days and weeks and months is one of a caregiver who shows up. You are probably doing more of this right than you know. The fact that you're watching a 20-minute video to understand your baby's inner world, that's not nothing. That is sensitive caregiving in its most fundamental form, the desire to understand. So let's bring all of this home, because understanding the science is one thing. Living with a crying baby at 11 o'clock at night is another. And I want to give you something you can actually use, not as a performance checklist, but as a genuine reframe that changes how the crying feels in the moment. The first shift is this. When your baby cries more with you than with anyone else, the new thought is not, "What am I doing wrong?" The new thought is, "My baby trusts me enough to fall apart." That is not a small thing. That is everything. That is the entire point of building a secure attachment. You have become the safe haven. The crying is the proof. The second shift is about your own nervous system. Because here is the thing about co-regulation that we touched on earlier. It only works if you are regulated. And that is genuinely hard when a baby has been crying for 40 minutes. But the research on parental stress responses shows something useful. Even a brief, deliberate, slow exhale, a longer out-breath than in-breath, activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It's not a trick. It's physiology. Your body cannot maintain a full stress response while you're breathing out slowly, and your baby will feel the shift. This is not about performing calm. It's about accessing it, even a little, even imperfectly. The third shift is about the people around you, because one of the most painful parts of the safe haven effect is that it's invisible to everyone except you. Grandma sees a calm baby. You see a screaming one. And without this framework, that gap reads as evidence that you're the problem. You are not the problem. You are the solution. You are the person the baby is using. And that is the highest compliment a baby's nervous system can pay. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that right now. A new parent who's been told their baby behaves better with someone else. A partner who doesn't understand why the baby seems to escalate when the primary caregiver walks in. A grandmother who thinks the crying means something is wrong with the relationship. Because this reframe doesn't just help parents, it helps everyone around them understand what they're witnessing. The fourth and final shift is about the long game. Because here's what the attachment research shows about securely attached children as they grow. They are more emotionally resilient. They recover from stress faster. They form healthier relationships with peers. They are more willing to explore and take risks because they have an internalized sense of a safe base to return to. They carry you with them, not as a dependency, but as a template. Every time you respond to that cry, every time you show up, even imperfectly, even exhaustedly, you are writing that template. You are building the internal working model that your child will carry into every relationship they ever have. The crying is not the story. The response is, and you are already writing it. If you've made it this far, 20 minutes into the neuroscience of why your baby cries, you are not an average parent. You are someone who genuinely wants to understand what's happening inside your child's mind. That's what this channel is built for. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this is what we do every week. Take the research that's sitting in academic journals and make it feel like something you can actually use at 11 o'clock at night. Your baby cries more with you because your baby knows, in the deepest biological sense possible, that you are the one who will catch them. That was never the problem. It was always the point. Thanks for watching. The end screen has more videos in the same world. Thanks for being here. Pick whichever video on the end screen calls to you.